myself a rational person, someone who could find a logical explanation for most things. That was until I stayed at the infamous Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. I had heard the rumors, of course. Whispers of its dark past, tales of suicides, murders, and the mysterious disappearance of Elisa Lam. But like many, I dismissed them as sensationalized stories meant to scare the gullible. As a travel blogger, I had stayed in countless hotels, each with its own quirks and histories. The Cecil was just another stop on my journey. It was a warm, breezy evening when I checked in. The lobby was grand but eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched. I shrugged off the uneasy feeling and collected my keycard from the indifferent receptionist, who barely made eye contact. Room 1413 was my destination. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have, each floor passing with a heavy thud. When the doors finally opened, I was met with a dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and carried a faint, musty odor that clung to the walls. I found my room at the end of the hallway. As I inserted the keycard, I felt a sudden chill run down my spine, but I dismissed it as the building's old ventilation system. The room itself was surprisingly modern, a stark contrast to the gloomy exterior. A large bed, a sleek desk, and a flat-screen TV, everything seemed normal. As night fell, I settled into bed, scrolling through my phone. The hum of the city outside was oddly comforting, a reminder of the world beyond these walls. But just as I began to drift off, a soft whisper broke the silence. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the whispers grew louder, more distinct. It was a woman's voice, pleading, desperate. Help me, please.
Please.
I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear more. The room was dark, the only light coming from the neon sign outside my window, casting an eerie glow. I checked the hallway, empty. No sign of anyone. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the mind in an unfamiliar place. But the whispers continued, each word sending chills through my body. I turned on every light in the room, hoping to dispel the growing sense of dread. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I noticed something odd, a small, dark stain on the carpet near the window. It looked fresh, wet even. I reached out hesitantly, my fingers grazing the surface. It was sticky, and as I brought my hand closer, the metallic scent of blood filled the air. Panic set in. I stumbled back, my breath quickening. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. I needed to get out. Grabbing my phone and room key, I bolted for the door. But as I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was as if some invisible force was holding it shut. I banged on the door, screaming for help, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. Desperation took over. I turned to the window, contemplating the impossible. Could I climb down? Before I could make a decision, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers were deafening now, surrounding me, closing in. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and I spun around, my heart in my throat. There, in the corner of the room, was a shadowy figure. It was a woman, her eyes hollow, her face twisted in sorrow. She reached out to me, her fingers brushing my skin. I could feel her pain, her despair. Help me, she whispered again, her voice echoing in my mind. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move, unable to breathe. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls pressing closer. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the door burst open and the lights flickered back on. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. A concerned guest had heard my screams and alerted the staff. They found me pale and trembling, barely coherent. I was moved to another room, but sleep was impossible. The memory of that night haunted me, the woman's desperate plea echoing in my mind. The next morning, I checked out, eager to leave the Cecil behind. As I walked through the lobby, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The receptionist handed me my bill with a knowing look, as if she had seen this before. I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. The streets of downtown LA were bustling, a stark contrast to the eerie stillness of the hotel. I wandered aimlessly, trying to process what had happened. As night fell, I reluctantly returned to the hotel, knowing I had to gather my things before leaving for good. When I entered room 1413, I was greeted by an icy chill. The air felt heavier, oppressive. I quickly packed my belongings, wanting to spend as little time as possible in that room. As I zipped up my suitcase, I heard it again, the whisper. "Help me." My heart raced as I turned to face the window. The figure was back, but this time she was closer, her face more defined.
Please.
Tears streamed down her cheeks as she reached out to me. I backed away, my mind racing with fear and confusion. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out once more. The room plunged into darkness, and I was enveloped by an overwhelming sense of dread. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold hand grip my arm. I yanked free and stumbled towards the door, but it was locked again. Desperation clawed at me as I banged on the door, screaming for help. The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. In the midst of my panic, I remembered the emergency phone by the bed. I scrambled to it, my hands trembling as I dialed the front desk. The line crackled to life, and a voice answered, but it was not the receptionist. "Help her," the voice whispered, echoing the words that had haunted me all night. I dropped the phone, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The shadows in the room seemed to move, coalescing into the form of a woman. She stood before me, her eyes pleading, her mouth forming the same desperate words. "Help me." I don't know what compelled me, but I reached out to her. As our hands touched, a cold surge of energy passed between us. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw something, flashes of her life, her death, her endless torment. Then, just as suddenly, she was gone. The room was silent, the oppressive weight lifted. The door clicked open, and I stumbled into the hallway, my mind reeling from what had just happened. The staff moved me to another room on a different floor, far from the haunted room 1413. I lay in bed, unable to sleep, the events of the night playing over and over in my mind. I could still feel her cold touch, her desperate plea echoing in my ears. The next morning, I checked out, determined to leave the Cecil behind. As I walked through the lobby, the receptionist gave me a knowing look, but said nothing. Outside, the sun was shining, and the city was alive with the hustle and bustle of everyday life. I vowed never to return to the Cecil Hotel. The experience had shaken me to my core, and I knew I would never forget the woman's haunted eyes, her desperate whispers. Years have passed since that night, but the memory remains vivid. I never returned to the Cecil, nor did I ever speak of my experience, until now. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I hear her voice again, pleading for help. And I wonder, what secrets does the Cecil Hotel still hide in its shadows?
It was the year 1974, and I was a young accountant, fresh out of university, working in the bustling heart of São Paulo. My office was located in the Joelma Building, a modern high-rise that stood as a symbol of progress and ambition. Little did I know that this building would soon become the backdrop of a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a typical Thursday morning, the 1st of February. The sun was shining brightly, and the city was alive with its usual chaos. I arrived at the office early, hoping to get a head start on the day. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and the sound of typewriters clicking away. Everything seemed normal until it wasn't. Around 8:50 a.m., I heard the first screams. At first, I thought it was a prank or an overreaction to a minor incident. But as the cries grew louder and more frantic, I realized something was terribly wrong. Smoke began to seep into the office, filling the air with a choking, acrid smell. Panic set in as people rushed to the windows, only to be met with the horrifying sight of flames engulfing the floors below. The fire spread with terrifying speed, consuming everything in its path. The heat was unbearable, and the smoke made it impossible to see. I remember grabbing a wet cloth to cover my nose and mouth, trying to find a way out. The stairwells were already filled with smoke, and the elevators were out of service. Desperation took over as I realized my only chance of survival was to reach the roof. I joined a group of colleagues as we made our way to the stairwell, each step a battle against the thickening smoke and searing heat. The sounds of the building groaning and cracking under the fire's intensity filled the air, mingling with the cries of those trapped. When we finally reached the roof, we were greeted by a scene of chaos. People were huddled together, some praying, others staring in disbelief at the inferno below. The heat was intense, and the smoke made it difficult to breathe. We signaled frantically to the helicopters circling above, hoping they would see us. Minutes felt like hours as we waited, the flames creeping closer. Just when I thought all hope was lost, a helicopter appeared, lowering a rope ladder. One by one, we climbed to safety, the intense heat and smoke making every second feel like an eternity. As I ascended, I looked back at the building. The sight was surreal, like something out of a nightmare. The flames roared, and thick black smoke billowed into the sky. I could see people at the windows, some waving desperately, others jumping to escape the inferno. The memory of their faces is something I will never forget. We were among the lucky ones. Many did not survive that day, and their stories of heroism and tragedy became part of the legend of Joelma. In the aftermath, the city mourned, and the charred remains of the building stood as a grim reminder of the disaster. Years passed, and the Joelma Building was eventually rebuilt, renamed Praça de Bandeira. But the ghosts of the past never truly left. Stories began to circulate about strange occurrences and sightings within the new building. The most famous of these tales is the legend of the 13 souls. It is said that 13 people, trapped by the fire, sought refuge in an elevator. They were never found alive, and their bodies were discovered huddled together, having perished from the smoke and flames. To this day, their spirits are believed to haunt the site, their presence felt by those who work in the building. One evening, several years after the fire, I decided to visit the new building. It was a pilgrimage of sorts, a way to confront the demons that had haunted me since that fateful day. As I walked through the lobby, I felt a chill in the air, an inexplicable sense of unease. The polished floors and modern decor couldn't hide the building's dark history. I spoke with the security guard, an old-timer who had worked there for decades. He shared stories of strange occurrences, lights flickering, doors opening and closing on their own, and the sound of footsteps echoing in empty hallways. He told me about the 13 souls, how their restless spirits were sometimes seen wandering the upper floors, their presence a somber reminder of the tragedy. Determined to see for myself, I took the elevator to the highest floor accessible. The ride was smooth, but as the doors opened, I felt an icy gust of wind. The corridor was empty, and the silence was almost palpable. I walked slowly, each step echoing off the walls. The air grew colder, and I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. As I approached the end of the hallway, I heard faint whispers, like a distant conversation. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably sorrowful. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers led me to a room that seemed untouched by time, its door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was even colder. The room was dimly lit, and I could see faint outlines of people. They were huddled together, just like the stories described. As I stepped closer, the figures faded, but the sense of their presence lingered. I could feel their pain, their fear, and their longing for peace. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and the lights flickered. Panic set in as I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. I felt a cold hand brush against my arm, and I spun around, expecting to see someone. But there was no one there, just the oppressive sense of sorrow. I don't know how long I was in that room, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, the door creaked open, and I stumbled out, gasping for air. I made my way back to the lobby, shaken but resolute. The security guard gave me a knowing look, as if he had seen it all before. I left the building that night, knowing I had encountered something beyond explanation. The 13 souls, the ghosts of Joelma, were real. Their presence was a testament to the tragedy and a reminder of the fragility of life. Even now, decades later, the memories of that day and the spirits I encountered haunt me. The Joelma Building, now Praça de Bandeira, stands as a symbol of resilience and a reminder of the past. And the 13 souls? They remain, their restless spirits forever tied to the place where they met their untimely end. I share this story not to frighten, but to honor those who perished and to remind us that some tragedies leave a mark that can never be erased. The ghosts of Joelma are a part of history, their whispers a reminder that the past is never truly gone.